The auctioneer slammed the hammer down so hard the crack echoed through the nearly empty warehouse. $200. Sold. A few bored mechanics laughed under their breath as the rust-covered Aston Martin was dragged aside like scrap metal waiting for a crusher. Nobody noticed the single dad standing quietly in the back, clutching his last $300 so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Nobody cared that his 6-year-old daughter was asleep in his truck outside with a fever because he couldn't afford another motel night. And nobody, not the bankers, not the collectors, not the smug luxury dealers sipping coffee near the front row, realized that 14 days later, that same, dead, Aston Martin would ignite the biggest bidding war the collector car world had ever seen. Ethan Cole had once been one of the best automotive engineers in Detroit. That was before the layoffs. Before the divorce. Before the hospital bills drained every account he had. Now he fixed farm trucks outside a collapsing garage in Oklahoma, while trying to keep his daughter Lily fed. He had stopped dreaming years ago. Dreams cost money. Survival didn't allow room for them. The auction was never supposed to matter. Ethan had only come because a friend told him old tools sometimes sold cheap there. But then he saw the Aston Martin sitting beneath layers of dust near the rear loading doors. The car looked dead. Flat tires. Missing badges. Oxidized paint. Interior torn apart. The windshield carried a faded orange sticker reading property damage, and inoperational. Most people ignored it immediately. But Ethan didn't. Because under all the ruin, he noticed something impossible. The chassis proportions were wrong. Not damaged wrong. Prototype wrong. His heartbeat slowed. He walked around the car once. Twice. Then crouched near the rear axle, pretending to inspect rust while his fingers brushed against a hidden weld line. His pulse exploded. Factory prototypes often carried subtle structural modifications invisible to the public. He had seen similar patterns years earlier while consulting for a confidential British engineering project. Then he saw the engine block number. Everything inside him froze. No. Impossible. He wiped dirt away carefully with his sleeve. The serial code beneath matched an experimental Aston Martin platform rumored to have vanished before production over 20 years earlier. Automotive forums called it a myth. Collectors called it the ghost platform. Only 3 were believed to exist. One had burned in testing. Another supposedly disappeared into a private Middle Eastern collection. The third had never been found. Until now. Ethan nearly stood up too fast. His mind screamed at him to stay calm. If anyone else recognized the number, the price would skyrocket beyond his reach. The auctioneer barely looked at the vehicle. Non-running Aston Martin shell. No title guarantees. Scrap value only. Starting at 200. Silence. No hands. 200? A mechanic laughed. Things worth more melted. 200, Ethan said quietly. The auctioneer pointed lazily. Got 200. Nobody countered. Sold. That was it. $200. The crowd moved on instantly. But Ethan couldn't breathe. Outside, rain hammered the roof of his old pickup while Lily slept curled beneath a blanket. Ethan sat frozen behind the wheel staring at the auction receipt in disbelief. If he was right, the car wasn't scrap. It wasn't even rare. It was priceless. But if he was wrong? He had just spent almost everything he had left on dead metal. The tow company dumped the Aston Martin outside Ethan's garage just before midnight. Under proper lighting, the car looked even worse. Fire damage marked parts of the engine bay. Rodents had destroyed wiring. The seats were missing entirely. Yet the deeper Ethan inspected it, the more terrified he became. This wasn't just a prototype. This car had been erased. Specific serial identifiers had been deliberately ground off. Internal modules were removed with surgical precision. Someone had tried very hard to make sure nobody could identify it. Which begged the question. Why had it ended up abandoned in a Midwest insurance auction? Lily appeared in the garage doorway rubbing her eyes. Daddy, is it gonna work? Ethan forced a smile. Maybe. Is it special? He looked back at the car. Yes, he whispered. Very special. The next morning he began dismantling the remaining engine components. Hours turned into days. He barely slept. He sold his watch for parts. Skipped meals. Drank gas station coffee until his hands shook. Then on the 4th night he found it. Hidden behind a false firewall panel. A titanium data capsule. His blood ran cold. Prototype manufacturers sometimes stored encrypted testing data physically to prevent digital leaks. Ethan carefully opened the casing. Inside sat a microdrive engraved with a faded Aston Martin insignia and a handwritten label. Valkyriex / property of Project Obsidian. Ethan stared at it for a long time. Project Obsidian was automotive legend. An ultra-secret collaboration rumored to involve experimental military-grade materials, hydrogen hybrid systems, and a top speed never publicly disclosed. The project supposedly vanished after a fatal incident during testing in Europe. No confirmed prototype had ever surfaced. Until now. His hands trembled so badly he nearly dropped the drive. Suddenly headlights swept across the garage windows. Ethan instantly killed the lights. A black SUV rolled slowly past outside. Then another. They didn't stop. But they came back 20 minutes later. Ethan's stomach tightened. Someone else knew. The next morning, 2 men in expensive coats arrived pretending to be collectors. They offered $5,000 cash without even inspecting the car closely. Ethan refused. Their smiles disappeared immediately. "You should reconsider," one said quietly. "Why?" The man stepped closer. "Because some things aren't meant to be found." Then they left. Lily looked frightened. "Daddy, who were they?" Ethan lied instantly. "Nobody important." But deep down, he knew the situation had become dangerous. That night he plugged the recovered microdrive into an isolated old laptop. Encrypted files appeared. Blueprints. Performance logs. Confidential engineering reports. And one video file. Ethan clicked it. Static flickered before revealing a dark test facility somewhere overseas. Engineers moved around a sleek black Aston Martin unlike anything ever produced publicly. Then the camera shifted toward a lead executive speaking urgently. "If this prototype reaches market, Ferrari and Bugatti collapse overnight." The video skipped. Another voice spoke off camera. "The military buyers doubled their offer." Then another cut. Smoke. Alarms. A crash. Screaming. The recording ended abruptly. Ethan sat motionless. This wasn't just a collector car. This was industrial warfare buried beneath metal and lies. His phone rang suddenly. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. A calm British voice spoke. "Mr. Cole, you recently purchased a damaged Aston Martin. Who is this? You have something that does not belong to you." Ethan's grip tightened. "What do you want?" "We're prepared to offer $2 million for the vehicle immediately." Ethan nearly dropped the phone. $2 million. For a non-running wreck. His silence revealed enough. The caller continued softly. "Unfortunately, if you refuse, others may approach less politely." The line disconnected. Ethan barely slept that night. By morning, word had somehow spread online after a local mechanic posted blurry photos of the car. Automotive forums exploded. Some called it fake. Others identified prototype indicators almost instantly. Then everything went insane. Journalists began calling. Collectors sent emails. Auction houses begged for meetings. And on day 8, someone broke into Ethan's garage. He arrived just after dawn to find tools scattered everywhere. Cabinets overturned. The Aston Martin untouched, but the laptop containing the files was gone. Lily's backpack sat open near the office door. Ethan froze. Then he heard breathing. A masked man emerged from behind the car holding a pistol. "Where's the second drive?" Ethan's pulse exploded. "There is no second drive." The man stepped closer. "Wrong answer." Before Ethan could react, Lily suddenly screamed from the truck outside. The masked man turned instinctively. Ethan launched forward. The gun fired. Glass shattered. They slammed into the Aston Martin together. Ethan grabbed a steel breaker bar and swung hard. The intruder collapsed instantly before scrambling away through the side exit bleeding heavily. Ethan sprinted outside. Lily was crying hysterically in the passenger seat. He hugged her tighter than ever before. And in that moment, he made a decision. He wasn't selling quietly anymore. If powerful people wanted this car hidden, then the safest thing he could do was make it impossible to bury. 3 days later, the story detonated across international media. The lost Aston Martin prototype found in rural garage. Experts flew in from Europe. Former Aston Martin engineers publicly authenticated key structural details. Collectors lost their minds. One billionaire in Dubai offered 4 million immediately. Another in Monaco offered 6. Ethan rejected them all. Then a sealed invitation arrived from R.M. Sotheby's for a private emergency auction in New York. Projected valuation, $8 to $10 million. Lily stared at the number repeatedly. Daddy, are we rich? Ethan looked at her tiny face and suddenly felt tears forming. For the first time, he whispered. Maybe. The auction night looked unreal. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while the restored Aston Martin sat beneath silk covers at the center stage. Ethan had spent every remaining dollar stabilizing, not fully restoring, the vehicle. Experts advised leaving portions untouched to preserve authenticity. Security surrounded the building. Billionaires filled the room. Representatives from royal families attended discreetly. Even Aston Martin executives arrived personally. Then Ethan noticed something disturbing. 2 of the same men from Oklahoma stood near the back wall watching silently. The auction began at 3 million. Within 30 seconds it hit 5. The room transformed into chaos. 6 million. 7. 7.5. Phones rang nonstop as international bidders joined remotely. Lily sat beside Ethan, clutching his arm so tightly her fingers hurt. Then one bidder stood. Tall. Gray-haired. Cold eyes. $10 million. Silence crashed across the room. Nobody moved. The auctioneer looked stunned. 10 million bid received. Ethan stared at the bidder in disbelief. Then the man spoke again calmly. And I'd like to address Mr. Cole personally. The room shifted uncomfortably. The bidder continued. You saved automotive history. Others tried to bury it because they feared what it represented. Innovation terrifies weak men. He paused. But tonight the truth survived. The hammer slammed. Sold. $10 million. Applause erupted violently across the ballroom. Lily burst into tears. Ethan couldn't move. Reporters rushed forward instantly, cameras flashing like explosions. Questions flew from every direction. How did you discover the car? What will you do with the money? Do you believe Project Obsidian was covered up? But Ethan barely heard any of it. Because across the room, the 2 men from Oklahoma quietly turned and walked away. Defeated. Gone. Later that night, after the reporters finally disappeared and the contracts were signed, Ethan stood alone beside the Aston Martin one final time. His reflection shimmered across the black paint. 14 days earlier, he had been a broke single father praying he could afford breakfast for his daughter. Now the world knew his name. But strangely, the money wasn't what overwhelmed him most. It was the realization that everybody else had looked at the car and seen garbage. Only he had looked deeper. Only he had noticed the truth hidden beneath ruin. Lily walked beside him holding 2 hot chocolates nearly bigger than her hands. Daddy? Yeah? Are we gonna buy a mansion now? Ethan laughed for the first time in years. Maybe someday. She looked back at the Aston Martin. I think it was waiting for you. Ethan stared at the car silently. Maybe she was right. Because sometimes the world throws away miracles simply because they arrive covered in dust.